Curious about the process of creating art in comics? Well, today I will be answering your questions you guys sent me over on Webtoons and Instagram. I will be talking about my art process, how I go about creating comics, as well as answering some questions you guys had about my stories. And while I talk, here is a recent illustration I made of my comic character Ava from Crystallized. This will be a fun and relaxing video, so let's get started. For our first question, Radar Cricket asks, do you struggle with perfectionism when you draw? And do you have any advice for if the perfectionism makes you unable to draw? Yes, there have been many times where I've struggled with perfectionism. I feel this can be especially hard when making comics since it deals with a large number of drawings for every comic page. This was a little hard for me to wrap around my head at first since I love to create illustrations and spend hours on one image. But with comics, I can't afford to make every panel a fully illustrated piece. Well, I guess I could, but then the comic would never get finished. And even with my illustrated work, I feel there are many times where I look at something once it's done and see that it didn't live up to my expectations. Which is hard when you spend hours and hours on it. So to help with this, if there's ever a time where I look back and see mistakes in my art, I take note of what I want to improve on and use that info for new art. I think it's much easier to apply what you have learned from old art to create something new, rather than reworking the same piece over and over again. And with time, you might find yourself taking less notes and liking what you create. When it comes to perfectionism with comics, what helps me is the fact that the readers will only view a panel for a few seconds at most. So as long as I can get the idea clearly shown in the panel, I need to move on to the next page. If your perfectionism is making you unable to draw, I would give myself time to just create bad art. Take out a scrap piece of paper, maybe scribble on your digital canvas if you're a digital artist, and focus on moving your hand. For me, it gives me a way to show that not everything has to be good, and I can still have fun drawing even when the end result isn't perfect. As long as you keep creating, keep going. For the next question, Artist of Fantasy asks, what is your process for character design? When it comes to designing a character, I like to write out a description first before sketching it out. I don't focus on things like their hair color or appearance, rather what their personality is, what their occupations or hobbies are, things like that. This way, I can get a better idea as to what their lives are like and think about how their design could fit into this role. Take Rachel from my comic Sugar and Swords. Since she works at a shop with food, I wanted to make sure her outfit would be easy to move in. So I gave her an apron and had her hair pulled up. I also like to keep in mind their silhouettes, which can help make them recognizable from a distance. And if two characters are usually seen together, I try to design them at the same time. Or at the very least, make sure they are distinct enough from one another. So when designing Owen, I chose cooler colors and a different build from Rachel, who is shorter with warmer colors. Speaking of my comic, Sugar and Swords, you guys had some questions about this story. The Memory asks, what was your inspiration for the game that Sugar and Sword takes place in? Well, the game that this comic is inspired by is a bunch of video games that I've played in the past. Games like MapleStory, early MMORPGs, Final Fantasy XIV, as well as board games like Dungeons & Dragons. I wanted to create a pretty simple fantasy world where I can focus on the jokes of each comic. So there are fantasy races like orcs, elves, and other magical people inspired by Lord of the Rings. Grendelkin asks, do the characters in Sugar and Swords who were made with the same character model ever think that they might be distant cousins or something like that? Yes, I would think they would. At the very least, they would find it a funny coincidence, but I wouldn't be surprised if they thought they were related in some way. Also, to answer your other question, would you ever consider a consequent-free crossover between Sugar and Swords and someone else's webcomic? Yes, that sounds fun, but unfortunately I don't have time to make a new episode at the moment to collaborate. But if anyone wants to use Rachel as a background shopkeeper or make a fun little cameo of her in their own comic, then go for it. If you do, please let me know because I would love to see it. Our next question is from The Best Dude Ever, and they ask, what would happen if a player succeeded in both teaching an NPC what a video game is and convincing them that they were in a video game? If an adventurer in the story were to convince an NPC of this, I think their reaction would differ depending on the character. I'm sure some of them wouldn't care as much or really think about it, while others would definitely freak out. Either way, an admin would definitely come in and sort things out. I personally don't know if I would ever make an episode about this, since Sugar and Swords is a fun slice of life, and I feel this could take the comic into an existential downturn. But I know many comments have asked this in the past, so it's an idea I do think about. The next question is pretty fun. Alicorn asks, if you could pick one video game to have the NPCs come to life and hang out with you, what would you pick? Honestly, this was hard to pick just one, because there are like so many cool characters out there. Some games I can think of off the top of my head are Final Fantasy XIV, Fire Emblem Three Houses, or Awakening, maybe even Deltarune, because I just finished Chapter 4. So to pick one, maybe Final Fantasy XIV? Only because I have been playing it recently and have been slowly working my way through the free trial content. I just love all the voice characters in that game. Speaking of games, Licking101 asks, have you ever played D&D and what's your favorite memory? Funniest moment? Saddest moment? Art of the characters? And yes, I have been playing D&D with a bunch of my friends for over 5 years. Like I mentioned earlier, this game has played a big inspiration in my comics. So, here are the characters that I have been playing. My first one, Leah, is a Wood Elf Druid. Next is Nora, a Rogue Halfling. And for a bit, I played as a Kobold Barbarian named Garina, and a Tiefling Bard, College of the Swords, named Adora. I have played Leah and Nora the most, so they have the most art drawn of them. And as for favorite moments, it's hard to pick one, but I think dropping a giant from the sky, beating the end of the game boss Tiamat, and just all the fun character interactions between fellow players would be my favorites. As for the saddest, definitely character deaths. My character hasn't died, but there was another player in our group whose character died in battle. He will be missed. Now for some general comic questions. DragonGirl016 asks, what size do you make your webcomic pages? For Webtoon specifically, I used to make them at 800 by 5000 pixels and vary the height of it depending on how long the episode was, with 300 dpi. If you only intend to post them online or on Webtoons, this size works. But since I ended up printing Sugar and Swords, to make it easier on myself, I now draw it at around 1067 by 7000 with 300 dpi, just to make the panels a little larger on the print version. For my webcomic Crystallize, I draw it at 24 by 18 inches with 300 dpi and an 1/8 inch bleed. Basically, for Crystallize, I like to draw the print version first, which is originally a 6x9, which I doubled the size, just so I can scale it down and keep the lines very crisp per print. Once Crystallized pages are done, I reformat them later for Webtoons. Our next question from Little Seed asks, any tips to start your own webcomic? Things you wish you knew? How do you go about paneling? When starting a new comic, I try to plan out as much as I can in the beginning. Outline the story, draw out the character designs, plan out the backgrounds. But sometimes it can be easy to get stuck in the planning phase. So for beginners, I would start by making a couple short 4-page or even just 4-panel comics. It can be tempting to start with your bigger, large-scale comics first, but the smaller you start, the easier it is to finish and get the hang of it. Also, if you draw digitally, make sure your canvas is at least 300 dpi or dots per inch. Even if you never end up printing it, having your work at this higher resolution will give you the option to if you ever want to in the future. Something I wish I knew earlier is that it's okay if your art style changes while drawing. The more you draw, the closer you get to the art style you want, so even though it's tempting to look at old comic pages and want to redraw them all, I feel it's better to spend more time on new art rather than constantly rework old stuff. When I started Crystallize, I ended up redrawing like the first couple of pages like multiple times, which cost me more time than needed. And as for paneling, something that I like to do is to look at webcomics that I like and study how they panel. Take notes on how the shapes of each panel vary in a scene, how the speech balloons flow from one place to another, And look at how much space between panels affects the pacing of a story. Usually panels that are closer to each other tend to make the story flow a little faster, and the more white space in between each panel will tend to set a more slower scene, or at least like a longer passing of time. Anyway, the more you draw comics, the more you understand how to plan out a comic page. For me, one of the most important parts of paneling is making sure the readers know which panel to look at next. In traditional comics, the panels are stacked, which can make for lots of fun layouts, but you need to make sure it's clearly readable for the audience. This is easier to do on webtoons since panels are only shown one at a time on your phone, but it's good to keep in mind nonetheless. Arissa Zuris asks, how long do you typically plan ahead on the storyline? Is it different between Crystallize, which seems to be a longer adventure, and Sugar and Swords, which is more episodic? Great question. For Sugar and Swords, I keep a document of a bunch of random ideas for future episodes. When it's time to draw a new update, I look at the list and pick my favorite. Because it's episodic, there is very little planning with this comic. However, with Crystallize being a longer chapter-based story, there is a lot more planning involved. Before starting the comic, I outlined the entire story, which at the making of this video is about 95% done. After that, I took the outline and broke it into 4 arcs or seasons. From here, I'm breaking each arc into roughly 20 chapters, scripting out each one to be about 100 panels or 20 pages. Then, I start drawing out the thumbnails and start actually sketching out the comic. As you can see, there are a lot more steps involved with story-driven comics. It took a few years before I felt the story was ready to even start releasing. If you are starting to plan out a big story, I highly recommend outlining the whole thing. It makes it so much easier to plan out chapters and pacing. But you don't have to go crazy with it. Even though my whole story is basically outlined, I only have it scripted out a few chapters ahead of what's currently being released. Best case scenario, I should have scripted out the first arc before starting to draw, but to stay motivated on this project, I started drawing it out sooner rather than later. So to answer your question, yes, my 2 comics vary greatly in the amount of time it takes to plan ahead. But that's probably why I've been able to create them both at the same time. One is a fun, episodic slice of life that's easy to plan, while the other takes more time but has a larger story. Our final questions are by Masoyasu, who asks, what were your inspirations in becoming an author? What were the first comics that you've read? Do the huge jungle creatures in Crystallize have names? How's your wrists? And a few more. I will answer what I can. My inspirations for becoming an author are the stories that I have read and watched over the years. I've had a few ideas that keep coming back in my head, so I wanted to turn those stories into reality. Plus, I love it when I hear artists talk about their characters and worlds and later announce that they're making a story with them, which really inspired me to do the same. Some specific people that inspired me are Kamome Shirahama, who created Witch Hat Atelier, and Stephen McCrane, who made Spaceboy, just to name a few. What were the first comics you read? Honestly, growing up, I didn't read too many comics. I never got into Marvel or DC until the movies came out and I just watched those, and I also spent most of my time watching cartoons and anime. But I do remember reading the Maximum Ride comic series growing up. And I also found webcomics like Cucumber Quest, Homestuck, and Harpy Gee. Comics like those inspired me not only to make my own comic, but my own comic website. How's your wrist? Much better, thank you. For those who don't know, last year I had a second surgery on my wrist. It took some time before I could draw again, but so far I have been able to draw at my normal pace. Do the creatures in Crystallize have names? Yes, they do, but for now they are unknown to the audience and our main character Ava. It will be talked more about in the second arc of the story as we go on. Honestly, it's been really fun designing these creatures for a project, so I can't wait to show you guys more. That was all the time I had for today, so thank you to everyone who submitted their questions over on Instagram and Webtoons. If you guys have any more questions you want to ask me, feel free to let me know in the comments below. You can read my comics, Crystallize, and Sugar and Swords for free online. And if you want more bonus content, like early releases of my Crystallize comic or some bonus episodes of Sugar and Swords, then please head over to my Patreon. Well, I think that was everything I had to say, so I hope you guys have a great day. Bye!